Good morning, afternoon, evening or night, whenever you're watching this, welcome. I'm on a beach beside a river, and since I was last here, this beach has grown fivefold at least, some of it by the pile of sand and stone growing taller and wider, and part by the river level falling. I'm hoping there will be some interesting old things to find here, washed down either the main river channel or the small tributary river that flows into it just behind me. Partial torso of an ornamental dog, a Pekingese, I think. Today I'm planning to start on this beach and then re-explore the edge of the land downstream for about half a mile or so to see how the river and humans have changed the biggest old dump site that I know over the last 18 months since I last did this walk. Bone, thought it might have been a knife handle. I don't still think so. A little scrap of copper wire. I'm planning on moving lightly, so not really taking as much as I usually would at this site, but I will still take anything particularly nice, historically interesting, or useful to me in craft projects that I already have planned. I do have a use for reasonably well-worn river glass, and it's small. I'm hoping that the things I find today and want are all small. This end of a dump site is the youngest, with things from the 60s and early 70s sticking out. The river is steadily moving away from it here, which is good news as regards possible nasty things in the dump site which won't be washed out, and bad news for the buildings on the other side of the river. I am a little surprised by how much is washed up here. It certainly wasn't my plan to spend the first half hour of my exploration searching here, but it is effectively a new site. And where it all comes from is a mystery that I really do now want to resolve. I have explored the upper reaches of this little river and some in the middle section. There wasn't enough in those bits to account for this, so I'll have to have a look in the bit between the middle and this end. And I know there is a dump site upstream on the main river, right next to it, but I have driven past it many times and seen no evidence of it being dug or leaking out, so it might be something further upstream or from one of the other tributaries. That's all for future me to figure out. For me at this moment has a beach to search. All of this section would usually be underwater, and strangely I rarely find much in such uncovered rocky beach sections, so I guess the things I'm interested in, even the things denser than this stone, are mostly carried along the sides of rivers, thrown out and away from the main current. Where they place on the beach that's only periodically below water is down to the smaller swirling currents which sorts things according to their relative density, also called specific gravity. The tail ends of the beaches is where the denser metals end up, like copper, lead and gold. A heating element from a kettle. This small island, I don't think I've ever seen this river quite so low before. Anyway, can't film too much of not finding anything, so I'll bring you back when I do find something. Approximately 17 seconds later I spotted this. A nice clay shooter marble, probably more than 100 years old, quite hard to be sure how much more, but this may well have been played with by generations of children and either lost or thrown away, buried for close to a century, dug up or washed out, carried by the river and dropped here, with slim chance of it being found, but today the river is low enough and I just happened to glance in the right direction. I love finding marbles. This would be the tail end of a beach for most of the year. It's currently high and dry, and there's a patch of things here waiting for me. This is a soil temperature sensor, or was, I think. Brass anyway, so I'll be taking it. An eye ointment pot, which would originally have had a foot, very common amongst the few that are found for it to be missing. This one dates from around about 1840, I think. A good find, and I'm happy with it. A little piece of nicely worn pottery, pleasing array of patterns, a nice piece for jewellery, a bit of brass sheeting, nothing embossed or stamped onto it, a small transformer, which holds a little bit of copper, brass and copper I take for my forge, and while I was picking all these things up, I spotted a bottle stopper over there. It's ceramic and big and probably stoppered a bottle of chemicals for industrial use. The same basic design as has been used for thousands of years, though this one probably somewhere between 1 and 200 years old. Closer to the 100-year mark is my guess. Is that going to be A, intact, and B, interesting? It is A, not B. A little bit of lead I'll remove and recycle and wash my hand after handling. A little brass ring. And not one, but 2 vulcanite bottle stoppers. That would have been impressive if I pulled it off, just trying to spin it round to read. Not one I have already, so I'll take it. And Cowburns Limited, also one I haven't seen before. So close together and strangely placed, I guess they might have been gathered together and left there by another mudlarker. Is that a crossbow bolt or a broken arrow? Not exactly a point on it, so I think it's a snapped-in-half archery arrow, and quite a cheap one, fiberglass shaft and cheap plastic fletching. I did once upon a time quite enjoy archery. Perhaps it will one day be another of my childhood interests that I revisit, like mudlarking, willow pattern, and brass. Curtain ring, I guess. There, a little milk glass box, intact and looks freshly exposed. Shouldn't really be considering taking it, glass is heavy and I want to move lightly, but it's quite cute and small and I can always change my mind anywhere along the way. Base of a dish or a vase maybe. Any maker's mark? Just brushing off the sand. Nothing much, but this will be coming home with me. I think it might end up sitting on my craft desk, a small dish for offcuts of wire and scraps of things that I want to keep, nicer than the small plastic thing I currently use for that. And this is a very nice piece of pottery, geometric pattern, nice shape, very good piece for jewellery. Here's a little pile of things I've picked up, some more pottery for projects that might conceivably happen one day, some copper for my forge for which I have several definite projects planned, and brass, a nice heavy plug hole, a bit of polytetrafluoroethylene tape to remove, Teflon tape, non-toxic but it is quite difficult to cut it away from plumbing fixtures, then it'll be ready for when I'm ready to melt down brass and pour into a mould I've made. That is, I think, about it for this little rocky beach. I will have a quick look at the small cliff face, see if there's anything interesting poking out, and then onwards. The upside of the younger end of the dump is more copper, the downside is the bottles are plainer. Spoke too soon. That's not a plain bottle. Orange juice drink, I guess. 50s, 60s, not really something I want, and the rust staining would be too much for me if I did otherwise want it. That's, wow, a big chunk of slag glass. I'd like to be able to take something like this, shape it down somehow to a sphere, a Gothic-style crystal ball. Not something I want to take today, it would slice up my bag, but I've already decided that I do intend to come back here fairly soon with a sieve and a spade, see what I can find under the top layer of beach gravels. I'll take the knife then if it's still here. Some wire. Thought it was going to be a water tank, but looks more like a JCB bucket now. Or perhaps an overhead bucket from a coal yard or ironworks or something else industrial. All sorts of things find their way into this river. Just up ahead there's 2 gardens currently falling in. When I did my first full explore of this riverside section, I found a large section of decking from one of those gardens, which was largely intact but about 100 metres downstream of where it should be. Won't be many more flood level events before the houses themselves start being undercut. I hope whoever lives there now doesn't live there when that happens. Wild garlic, or ramps. Probably my favourite foraging plant. I wouldn't forage them from here, too high a possibility of them having absorbed something nasty from the dump site, but I can still love the smell. And I'm happy to have the strange company of that swan which seems to be drifting downstream backwards, keeping an eye on me. This section I'm approaching is as close as this part of the country gets to a swamp. It's often inundated, the trees are bent and stunted, self-coppicing, and the ground plants are a primeval variety that will be pretty big and hard to wade through by the summer. As you can probably tell by the fresh sprouting leaves and the wild garlic, I'm filming this in very early spring. In fact, there was still snow on the tops of hills last week. The nest of shopping trolleys. I think it's moved downstream a bit since last I was here. The small tributary river at the start of this video has a small organisation of people looking after it, organising litter picks and cataloguing and doing a few bits to aid the wildlife and plant life. I hope one day there'll be a similar organisation for this river. I'd join it. Floodwaters have cut in here considerably. I guess it will continue to happen at least until the pipe itself breaks and gets carried away. It will be interesting to see how far it gets by next year. Duck eggs. Sadly, I don't think they hatched. I did once try to actually follow the riverbank of this section, and I'm sure there are a few bits and pieces to find along this section that I'm missing by going inland, but there is no path, and the vegetation near the riverside is tangled and largely impenetrable. I might boat down this river one day, see the bits I'm missing. Ah yes, the plastic amongst these trees is insurmountable for just me. I'm not filming it all by any means. There's a portaloo and several wheelie bins washed up a short way back. I will certainly take plastic out of this river system today, fill whatever space I have in my bags that I do not fill with finds, but it feels overwhelming. The paddock over the river beyond the trees gets a similar amount of plastic landing there during flooding events. It's a National Trust property and the rangers there do a big clean-up after each flood. My best friend works there and elsewhere as a National Trust ranger. Over here though, it's council-owned land, and the council is financially overstretched, and litter-picking the river system is probably not something they'll ever actually be able to afford. So it would take a non-profit volunteer organisation with permission from the council and insurance, because, well, I never leave here without at least one minor injury, usually a scratch or a bruise, but worse is certainly possible. The finds here will be few and far between, so I'll bring you back when I've found something. First find is tendrils of copper wire attached to, I'm not sure, some very corroded aluminium. Looks like it might have been part of a hydraulic or pneumatic system. I'm sure somebody watching might recognise this. By all means, tell me if you know. Nothing much of interest, not surprised. It's not a beach that ever does catch much. That's a little surprising though. Footprints. Human. This beach is not very accessible at all. Swampy, stagnating water ahead, and that goes a fair way inland. In fact, by far the easiest way for me out of this area is back the way I've come, and I didn't see any clear signs of other walkers that way. So whoever it was intrepid. Might conceivably have arrived by boat. Makes me more keen to bring a kayak to this river. The swampy water smelled really bad, so I've come back to the big pipe and walked back towards what is loosely known as civilization to bypass it. Bit of a mess here, but it's not finished, whatever it is the council is planning for this area. And it is, after all, still an old dump site, so messes are expected. Hopefully they'll clear up the edges when it's done. It's increasingly common for old dump sites to be mined for the metals and now quite valuable materials buried in them, and this site almost certainly contains several thousand tons of iron and steel, maybe a few hundred tons of copper and brass, and similarly lead, a few hundred kilograms of rarer metals including nickel, tin, silver and gold, and probably an absolute fortune in vintage bottles. I think its current use, though, is more valuable. Playing fields, habitat for animals and birds, and a tourist attraction for mudlarkers and bottle diggers. Not yet past the swampy bit, and nothing looking particularly worth a climb down and then straight back up again. I've often wondered if digging into this hard-to-get-to side of a dump site would reveal much. I think I'm about to find out. There are a lot of bottles here. Can't tell from that, though, whether the diggers found many that they thought were worth taking. Can tell from them roughly the age of the strata that's been dug into. That might also be a datable indication. Bayonet fitting incandescent light bulbs, in common usage across the British Empire since the 1870s, but I think that shape didn't come about till quite a bit later, 1940s maybe. Some 1940s and 50s bottles here. A little bottle, which I'll take. This one is older, I think it's circa 1910, if eBay listings of these are correct. I've got a few complete ones and I looked for a date for them. eBay was the only source that I could find. Milk glass. Brass. Wow, actually, this is like an imprint fossil of a coin, made up of the material that made up the coin. Hard to tell if any of the coin remains somewhere. I'm burning through my battery power fast today, already halfway through the second of 4 batteries, and there's the cliff face and beach to come, so I'll have a look around here without filming and then show what I've found. Okay, I found another brass thing. I think it's the lid off a compact, hat or a pocket watch, a little lead toy soldier, a sniper missing his gun. I do like finding old toys, no matter how toxic they are in materials or what they're trying to instill in the child who played with them. Back now down towards the river, a spot that I've explored once and then seen from afar many times as it gets progressively messier with plastics. So, trigger warning I guess, it's distressing, and yes, something absolutely should be done about it, but it's not an easy place to access, and because it's not known to mudlarkers as a spot where much washes up or washes out, it doesn't attract many people who, as a side note to their hobby, do a little bit of litter picking. That beach is looking about twice as wide as it usually looks. Vintage bottles. An enamelware wash basin and the decking that I mentioned earlier, and I think it's around about another 40 metres downstream from where it first washed up a year ago. The wood sealant seems to be doing a good job, it's not rotting much yet, hopefully it's non-toxic to the river. Interesting what the water's doing. I think this inside curve of the river might actually be becoming a new spot where the river is dropping things. It's still upstream of the cliff face that the river has carved, so the things it's dropping won't necessarily match up to the bounty of interest and fun that the beach downstream once caught. It'll mostly be plastic and pallets and such, which floodwaters pluck from streets and yards adjacent to the river, and yes, some of it probably is actually deliberately dumped into the waterways. It does seem to also be dropping things that have washed out or been dug out of a dump site upstream, just not the critical mass yet of things that would make this attractive to mudlarker litter pickers. Stem coal sounds like a medication. And fossil? No, cement. Oh well. I kinda want to look around that island. I've occasionally found things there, but can't get there directly. Have to go sideways and then across. Here, I reckon. It's quite a large area to search, for winds blowing loudly and the finds will be sparse, so I'll just bring you back when I find something. A few vintage bottles here, and I can see that this is broken, but it's not a top I often see, and it's a beautiful colour. Some very fresh looking footprints. I would guess that whoever made them was here no more than a few hours ago. Now, did they come from the small beach? I think that's the easiest way, or the cliff face, which is tough without waders, and the last time the scramble over the hillside left me with a lot of thorn scratches. Not much of interest on this beach. A brass thing, I have no idea what. Some copper wire and a piece of copper pipe with quite an unusual cutout. Now I have to recross this relatively shallow bit, work my way along over a swampy bit, around the shoulder of the hill, along the water's edge to the cliff face, and downstream from there as far as my batteries last. This is new to me, as in I've walked this way before a year ago, and that bottle digger spoil pile is one that I do not recall seeing, even though it looks like it's several years old. The spoil pile does look old, but it looks like somebody's climbed this way recently, maybe to do some digging, worth a bit of exploration. It kinda looked like it might be a nice poison bottle, but nope. Plain, probably for tablets. The hole isn't actually deep, which usually means the finds are fairly shallow. So could a digger here dig deep, or would the work be constrained by landslips? This hole too barely scratches the surface. Looks like the hole might have been started by the falling of a tree, which maybe means that not much digging was needed here. Does make me want to come here with a spade, dig directly inwards and see if my mental model of the internal part of this site is vaguely accurate. Not something that I would do though, I don't have permission and my back wouldn't like it. Not seeing anything much of interest that I want to take today. That jar maybe. No, cracked. And this jar has some nice iridescence. This jar too. Textured surface and a moderately nice shape to it. It's a maybe, starting out at the quite unlikely end of things. I have until I get back to my bag for it to grow on me. No easy way along the hillside, and I've left my bags down there, so down the spoil pile. Nothing else poking out of the sides. Nice colour, but plain, and I'll leave the jar too. Steel bucket, I think, very squashed. Quite a 90s style of skateboard, not sure if they're still made like that. And is this a copper kettle? Curses, it's aluminium. About the right colour for oxidised copper, but I think that's just staining from having been buried for 80 plus years. Oh well. The early spring light is not great for filming, it's been quite grey today, but the low vegetation, the lack of developed and entangled thorn vines makes this section of riverbank actually passable for once. A week prior the water was too high, a month from now it will be a growing sea of nettles and blackberry thorns. going to need both hands for this last muddy bit. Hello, cliff face, my old friend. I've come to search you once again. Poison bottle, light red water. Is it coloured glass beneath the mud? No, clear glass, coated with and full of mud. I'll leave it. This cliff face will have been picked over a lot since the winter floods. I've been here myself twice since then, and seen several people here each time. Each weekend draws not crowds, but at least a few mudlarkers. But no matter how many people come here, or how often they come, there's always a few things left to find. A button which bears the colour of brass verdigris, but I think it's either bone or wood, and the colour is transfer from that. A compact with a broken mirror, and now it's even more broken. Don't think there's any metallic brass left in this, it's all verdigris, which I'll take, leaving the broken glass of the mirror. Obligatory panning shot, which serves as a sort of record of how much further the river has cut, as measured from the overhead power lines. Not much movement at all since last I was here. Poison bottle. Again, it's clear, and I have too many already. A milk glass pot, which I also have too many of already. A glass rod. It might be uncoloured glass and a little glass sick, but I still like finding these and taking them for future as yet unplanned craft projects. The Cupid doll. Well, torso and legs of one. Japanese made. I hardly ever find these, and I take them not for me, for other people, other mudlarkers who do crafty things. Such a beautiful colour. If I didn't already have 3, I would take it. As it is, I'll leave it for the next mudlarker. I never find any old films with images on them, 100-year-old photos that I could develop. One day, maybe. A nest of copper wire, and a smaller nest of steel wire, both useful in craft, and a bit of lead beading, not so useful and quite toxic, so I'll certainly wash my hands after handling, but taking it stops it getting into the river and it has scrap value. Newspaper from 1929, and the first ad I see is incredibly similar to one I keep seeing now in 2022, for an unprecedented new way of learning a foreign language quickly. I forget what I take in from such methods quickly too, so slow and steady it is for me. That looks French, I think. I've seen similar when I was trying to identify a piece I found in similar turquoise milk glass. I'll probably mangle the pronunciation, but I think the company was Portiers Valerisval. Very old glass company, though this is maybe 150-ish. What I can see of it on this is the most beautiful iridescence I think I've ever seen on glass. I do not think that if I clean it, a butterfly of a bottle shall emerge from this chrysalis of crud, but I'm still going to try. It's a wet cell battery, not quite as complete as some I've found. There's somebody who watches my videos who can and quite enjoys restoring these. So if you're watching, you know who you are, and if you want this one and another that I found recently which is in better condition, then do get in touch. I was not shocked exactly, but perhaps awed when I first saw the exposed clay layers here bleeding iron oxide. That was months after I'd first found the site, soon after a flood, and it was a very strange and alien new face to a site I'd become accustomed to. I think it could still be shocking to anyone, say, watching one of my videos here for the first time. It's both a horror and a glory. Trash of generations past being cut into by the river, things that shouldn't go into the water being washed away, polluting. And amongst all this, these discarded and formerly buried things, there are things wanted once again, and things not exactly wanted but recyclable, upcyclable, scrappable, and people who aim to do just that. Not just me, I'm happy to say, who takes the lead. That's the label from a cat food pouch, modern and plastic. I shall take it when I move on and dispose of it more properly. Haven't taken much plastic so far today, but will certainly fill 2 bags total, one of which will be mostly plastic. The other looks like it's going to be weighed down with lead. Lead-shielded copper wire, and a spoon. It looks like a standard issue First World War soldier's spoon, but missing the handle and so the soldier identification number, if it had one. Copper wire. More lead shielded. That looks interesting. There's some brass on it. A bracket that looks like it might have held a telephone receiver, and on the back a mess of rust and verdigris. I have no confidence in my guesses for what this might have been. Anyone else? And this is part of a clock, the frame around which the clockwork would work. It falls in overly wet weather and the overly dry. It's looking very crumbly today, so I'll keep my distance. Oh, a tap. And it reminds me very much of the ones that were in the bathrooms at my primary school. They'd probably been replaced by now, they were really quite old then. This one is almost certainly too far gone to restore, but not too far gone to melt. I want it. I don't usually actively try to break things at dump sites. What I don't want, someone else might. But I did want the tap, and the broken sink is very unlikely to be anyone's ideal craft material. Still feels kinda wrong though. Another visit to the cliff face concluded. The way out is up there. I will look around this beach down here first. I've found good things here before, but it's the start point for most mudlarks visiting here. I'd be quite surprised if I find anything much today, and I need to save on battery. I'm down to my last one now. So bye for now. I'll be back if I find any surprises. That beach over there used to glitter with broken things, and amongst them hid intact little things, like alley-gops, tiny bottles, marbles. It was great fun finding them. The beaches change shape, the river flows differently, the things that wind up there are different, and of course a lot more people know about it now, so I will wade across to it if I see a likely spot, but I won't expect to find much. Distressed for Canada goose somewhat. I think it's nesting time for them. I'll try and give them their space. This beach is never the same shape. That beach over there is one that I haven't gotten to yet. James of Find and Create and his daughter have managed it once. They found some bottles and things washed up there. Don't think they were filming though. Once upon a time this beach was a wonderland of modest vintage treasures. I found figurines and poison bottles, clay pipes, squashed horse, miraculously intact newspapers and marbles. It really was a wonderful place during a brief window of time that I think accounts for maybe a quarter of all my mudlarking videos so far. I did not hold in my heart the truth that in time all things must pass. When I was here I was in the moment and it was glorious. The glory is faded now. The river no longer drops much here. Mostly plastics, when it does occasionally rise above the built-up plateau of sand and gravel. So why do I still come here? To decompress after the intense search at the cliff face, skim some stones, wade a bit, to see how it's changing, pick up some other plastic, and maybe, just maybe, to find something good. Today I'm hoping to see otter tracks too, and maybe a kingfisher. Mostly goose tracks, but definite signs of otters too. A good sign that despite everything, the river is in fairly good health. That's the clearest footprint and quite fresh. Would love to actually see otters here. But in order to do so I would have to stay still, out of the way, and most likely for day after day. They range far and wide, here last night, but maybe 10 miles away this evening. So different to my first visit here. I'm looking forward to seeing what changes next. Wire. This bit of land is the new leading edge of a beach as the river bends away from it, cutting into the opposite bank. It's partway through a process that looks suspiciously like it might make an oxbow lake. I don't know if it will actually complete that process. There isn't another one on this river, a few on one of its tributaries though, quite a way downstream. I have crossed the river via this natural weir at the top of the riffle, and I wish I could film the search here and get better shots of the swallows swooping over the field and the water, but I'm out of battery. I might be able to film a tiny bit more with one of the cool-down batteries, but they're in my bag on the other side of the river, so bye for now. Back across, battery at 5%, perhaps enough for a brief introduction to what I found on that beach. Firstly, I found a nesting goose, so I had to keep my distance, but I also found a nice little cotton reel ink bottle, a fork, probably brass, battery at 4%, some copper wire, a ceramic light switch with a brass top and there'll be some brass inside, an insulator, another light switch, and this one's brass all over, the casing and the switch, 3% battery, falling fast, a little teaspoon, a piece of pottery, 2%. I like the vibrancy of the colours on this one. I won't be able to finish this, but a lid off a pickle jar, pan yan. I have several jars. Roundup time, and I'm sorry about that. I had planned to get a lot further downstream, walk through and delight in a field of wild garlic flowers, which I think were likely at their very best on that day, but poor energy management, both battery and bodily, meant I had to end the exploration there. I went back about 10 days later to film further downstream, also revisited the first beach with a spade and a sieve to see what sort of thing I could find beneath the surface, also visited the cliff face again because no matter how many times I visit it, there's always something worth finding there, and indeed I found a nice blue poison bottle. Alas, by then the garlic flowers were past their best. And what I was really hoping for didn't happen. I didn't find any new spots where the river had started dropping things, since it no longer drops much on the main beach. Back to the plus side, I did spot a previously unknown to me part of another dump site across the river, and the video from my visit to that has already been out for 3 months. I went there with James of the channel Find and Create. there were many nettles. Back to this outing, and finds-wise, well, it wasn't actually meant to be a day of finding much. I planned to walk lightly and just catalogue the changes to the site and try to spot any new opportunities, but I did still end up finding and taking quite a lot. This blue milk glass vase is indeed French, from a very old company of glassmakers. Surviving examples aren't all that rare, so I did try cleaning it up, but not all that hard. I don't think I would be able to get all of the iron oxide staining out, no matter how hard I tried. I won't be attempting to fix it either. I don't really know what I'll do with it. It's really not to my taste. I took it to confirm or refute my guess about its origins. The wet cell battery I took just in case the person who restored the one he asked me to go back and pick up wants another one. Well, another two. I have found another in about the same condition as the first one. A few nice pottery pieces for craft working, some bottle stoppers, which no plans for, but I still have a little enjoyment in finding them, particularly the glass ones. Most of a Cupid doll body, which will go into a box for the next time that I see mudlarking with kitten caboodlers, who I was very happy to meet up with recently as they passed through West Yorkshire. They took a few things that I offered them for crafting their dolls and doll houses. The Ointment Jar is quite a rarity. Only found one once before and didn't know what it was then. It's not really obvious, and it's strange to see such elaborate packaging for such a small amount of ointment. It would have had a pedestal, and it has impressed lettering around the edge. S. Green, 2 Union Place, Lambeth. Hand-filled with blue glaze, all for maybe a millimetre of ointment. Must have been quite some product to warrant all that. No glass marbles on this outing, but still happy to find a ceramic one. Happy to find lead toys too, though prefer finding the animals to soldiers. I don't know if I filmed picking this up, my first bit of pewter in about 2 years. I am not set up for, but would like to one day try separating the metals that make up this alloy. Mostly tin, some antimony, copper, and maybe a bit of lead, considering that this is probably a century or more old. I think this is quite amazing. I can see details of a coin that used to sit here. Not enough to read it, just isolated letters, and not even a number. I haven't tried yet, but I think I will try to take a cast off it when I'm mixing up some silicone for another project, see if any more detail appears in the cast. There's not a lot of interest beyond what it could all one day become in the rest of the copper and brass I found, but I am still happy to have found it all. I have lit up my forge again now. I filmed it, I made mistakes in what I was trying to do, but I will try again, hopefully filming several more times before the end of summery weather this year. From the search of a final beach, which I had not the battery power left to film, and which I have not already shown in that impromptu mini roundup accompanied by a countdown of battery power, I found the brass remains of a clutch purse and the leg of a fairly large ceramic doll. That is the finds, and now for thanks. Thank you everyone who's still watching my videos after so many late uploads. There's been so many extended and largely unexplained gaps. It's been a rough year for me, and I've only managed to put out 12 videos in the last 12 months. It's really not a good output rate, less than half of what I hope for going forwards. So thank you for your patience. A big thank you to everyone who has liked, commented on and or shared my videos. It all helps. A big thank you to the kind people who've donated through Ko-fi. I am very grateful, and it makes a huge difference. And finally, a big thank you to Fleur and Kate of Mudlarking with Kitten Caboodlers. I had the great pleasure of meeting up with almost all of them recently. Fleur, Kate, Oscar, and one of the ones that prefers to remain behind the scenes. We had a lovely time wading around in the river with clear-bottomed buckets, looking for things and finding them, and they have, unexpectedly, in thanks for the day and for some doll finds that I let them have their pick of, very kindly purchased 2 things off my Amazon wish lists. They were a surprise when they came. I don't get email notifications and don't look very often at the wish lists, so thank you, Fleur and Kate, for these artisan Turkish delight, which I'm sure both my girlfriend and I will very much enjoy. And for this specialist glue, I've used it before when making up mini books of story poems for book fairs as samples from a bigger book that I wrote. The main draw of this glue being that it doesn't wrinkle paper, so perfect for, say, wallpapering a book nook diorama. Thank you so much, Fleur and Kate. This was a lovely surprise. I do hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, and if you'd like to, then any show of appreciation is very much appreciated. I hope that you're all keeping safe and well, looking after yourself and loved ones as best you can. Thank you all very much for watching, and for now, goodbye.